Give the people what they want.
Give the people what they want.
Give the people what they want. Your weekly movement news roundup. Today is Monday, the 21st of February. You're surprised to be with us. We're supposed to be with you only on Friday. On the other hand, it's Red Books Day, one of the most important days on the calendar of the international left, as important as May Day. It's on the 21st of February 1848 that a young Karl Marx and a very young Friedrich Engels, sitting in Brussels in Belgium, finished their pamphlet, The Communist Manifesto. It was published for the first time on the 21st of February. Little did they know that soon thereafter Europe would rise up in a rebellion called the Springtime of the Peoples. Little did they know at that time that it would become the most read book in world history, perhaps up there with other religious texts, but Bible and so on, let them be. Communist Manifesto saved my life. Red Books Day, comrades, started today in Indonesia. In Kerala, 500,000 people decided to read together in 35,000 meetings. The day is going to go across Africa, Europe, Latin America. Eventually, the sun will set in Hawaii when Red Books Day will come to a close. We have some special guests for you today. I'm going to start just by telling you that because in Kerala, 500,000 people sat down to read, what they read together were the writings of our great intellectual EMS Namboodiripad, the first chief minister of Kerala, the Communist Party of India member at the time, later general secretary of the Communist Party of India, Marxist for many years. Well, I wanted to share a little bit about these books because two of them are published by Leftward Books, and that is going to be important in the story in a second. I wanted to share with you something interesting. EMS Namboodiripad wrote about everything. He took Marxism by the throat and shoved its face into the soil of India. He wrote about Indian peasant struggles. He wrote about Indian history. He tried to tell the story of Indian history from a Marxist perspective. What would Marxist tools look like when they confronted the reality of India? How to understand, for instance, the question of caste, one of the most wretched hierarchical institutions in the world, how to deal with that. EMS Namboodiripad directly confronted the question of caste in several important essays. But the essay that I have often turned to when I think about EMS Namboodiripad, there are a couple. One, his very important essay on the women's movement in India. Today, in fact, in New Delhi, the All India Women's Democratic Association welcomed the new press officer from the Cuban embassy, and they sat down and discussed issues such as the Cuban Federation of Women and what the agenda is there and what the agenda is in the Indian women's movement and so on. EMS played a big role in the founding of the All India Women's Democratic Association. But the essay that I wanted to mention briefly before I hand it over to our lovely guests that we have here is an essay based on a seminar that EMS gave. In 1973, in Santiago, Chile, there was the coup against the government of Salvador Allende. And in the middle of the coup on the 11th of September, Allende was killed. Very shortly after, in India, in Trivandrum, there was a seminar held on the question of what had happened in Chile. And EMS Namboodiripad wrote a very long paper where he went in great detail to what had occurred in Chile. He looked at the developments carefully, and far off in India, didn't matter that it was thousands of kilometers away. Far off in India, EMS Namboodiripad had a paper called Chile and the Parliamentary Road to Socialism. Now, what's amazing about this paper is he firstly talks about what happens in South America in detail, as I said, but then he tries to recover what is the lesson from this this occurrence that took place far from India. And he looks into the question of disarming the people, how to protect the people from the agents of imperialism, in this case, the military led by General Augusto Pinochet. And he comes out and he says, let's consider what would have happened had the people been armed and brought to the street to politically confront the coup. But he's very careful at the end. This is what he says, and I'm going to read these sentences just to give you a taste of our leader, EMS Nambudripad. It would be wrong to draw the conclusion that whatever opportunities arise for such a development of the popular democratic forces leading to such a situation as the emergence of rival centers of power, bring the people onto the street, create dual power. He said, whatever happens, he says, let's look at the question of Indonesia and Chile, two countries where the left was decimated by brutal violence. He says, making facile assumptions and working out tactics in accordance with these, with what? With a close study of the reality of the situation is the essence of our, struggles. In other words, we've got to look not just at India. We've got to take Marxism and make it look at India, but not just that. Got to also pull the camera back, look elsewhere in the world and learn our lessons. Today, Red Books Day 2022, EMS Nambudripad, super character to be reading. Now, we're going to go to Europe, to Berlin, where I must say there's a beautiful statue of Marx and Engels. And in Berlin, we're going to meet Franziska Kleiner, who is with the International People's Assembly. Franziska, welcome to Give the People What They Want. And since the people want somebody from Germany, the original language of the Communist Manifesto, what are you reading?
Hello, all. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's such an honor. I'm a big fan of Give the People What They Want, and a big fan of every single one of you people. So that's I don't know, it was a very stressful invitation to come here because I'm going to try my best. When you asked me what I was reading for Red Books Day, I went to my bookshelf and I found children's books, lots of them. Like there's Brecht, there's novel stories for children. I found picture books for people who don't like reading, like graphic novels about Rosa Luxemburg. I found really tiny books, like quotations from Chairman Mao. And then I found really big books. And I even found some books by Vijay and all of these things. And so I found it all very, very difficult. And of course, there are the classics of there's some Marx, some Lenin. I found it very difficult to choose. And as I was going through them and reading a little bit here and a little bit there, I got stuck on a book that was a little bit surprising to me. I haven't read it in a very long time. And it's called Sonia's Report. It is, wait a second, can you see this? Yeah. It is by a woman called Ruth Werner, but then her name, of course, isn't Ruth Werner. Her name was Ursula Koczynski, and maybe she also had 1,000 other names. She's a German communist. This is her autobiography. She is a German communist. She just died in 2000. I know her, or I've come to know her as a children's author when I was young, because she lived in the GDR and published children's books there. In her autobiography, Sonia's Report, she tells the story of how she was politicized. She was born the beginning of the 20th century. So she speaks about Rosa Luxemburg and, the things that actually happened in Berlin at the time. She is from Berlin. She speaks about how she joined the communist youth in Berlin, how she organized the workers with the workers, worked and learned with them. And then she does surprising things. She moves to Shanghai in 1930, where she facilitates conspiratorial meetings with local and foreign communists. And she sends messages from, later on a little bit, she sends messages from the Japan fascist occupied territories of China to the Soviet Union. She works for I think it would be called the military arm of the Secret Service. And so she sends messages from occupied Poland, and then later she moves on to Britain, where she spies in Britain for the Soviet Union. And she's maybe best known for being a courier for Klaus Fuchs and Melita Norwood, who some people maybe know as the atomic spies, because they hasten, in fact, in the end, that the Soviet Union is also able to produce an atomic bomb in 1949. Now, I know it's an autobiography, and I think that learning history or like gaining political understanding from autobiographies and real life stories can be a bit tricky, because it can create sort of like a hagiography, like a way where you just look at history of great men, rarely great women, but in this case, it would have been a great woman, where you learn sort of individualized stories and you somehow feel that individuals make history. But then I also feel that like life stories can be incredibly compelling and real. And to see how, like, for example, Ruth Werner herself, how she learned, how she grew, how she handled the contradictions of all the different roles she has to play in her life, like as a member of the Communist Party, as a member of a co-inspirational group in a foreign country at that, as a woman and a mother, and, you know, running between like bougie circles and, again, the working class groups that she actually wants to work with, and how you sort of learn from her dedication and her humbleness and the conviction of like working for humanity. So maybe it's actually something like a counter hagiography that shows that like you can be embedded in the world and in a group, and you can work and live as a communist, and it's actually more inspirational and makes it not so much that there's only heroes, but so much more that there's humans who are fighting with us. So this is what I got stuck with reading all night, because you made me and you asked me what I should bring. And so this is what I have.
But before you go, can you please say "Workers of the World Unite, you have nothing to lose but your chains" in German?
I don't even know how that goes in German. Arbeiter der Welt, vereinigt euch, ihr habt nichts zu verlieren außer eure Ketten.
Wow. Wow. What she said.
Wholeheartedly
Thank you for
endorse.
joining us, Franziska. That's amazing. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you so
got to
much.
read this book by Ruth Werner. And we're going to have a list of these books available for people later. Yeah, great.
Cool.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, guys. Ciao.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Now, Zoe is sitting with a very interesting looking spider's web of Red Books Day. Amazing. So impressed by that. Zoe, I know you've been traveling all over the place, bringing stories to give the people what they want. People's Dispatch. Of course, everybody knows peoplesdispatch.org. Do you get time to read any books, or, you know, what's going on? Like, do reporters read?
Yes, they do read. But, you know, for a while, I was in a bit of a reading rut. I found it very hard to, you know, after reading articles the whole day and, you know, just the exhausting work of reporting, it was really hard for me to like get back into reading. And I struggled with this for a while. And then I visited my lovely comrade, Vijay, and he bestowed upon me this isn't the actual one, but he gave me a copy of his amazing book, Washington Bullets. And, you know, as I think if people have heard Vijay talk about this book before, it's designed to be readable, because books should be read. They're not just to sit on the shelf and make you feel intimidated. And so this book, you know, it's written in the format of, as you say, Vijay, Facebook posts. And so it was really, for me, the perfect kind of reinsertion into, you know, building a reading habit, building this practice of engaging in study. I mean, beyond it being accessible and, you know, something that I felt comfortable reading, it's also an incredibly important text in the sense that it really brings to the present decades of U.S. foreign policy, reminds us at a very important moment how the U.S. operates. I mean, I think it's incredible the way that you were able to, you know, study these documents that exist in the public domain. And, you know, some of them we don't even know about how the CIA operates. I especially love the intro, which was written by Evo Morales shortly after, you know, he was overthrown in one of these Washington Bullets style coups, which you know, in detail discuss. You talk about the strategy which is used, and it's sometimes I think we talk a lot about U.S. imperialism, and we can look in the past and say, oh, that was a U.S. backed coup, that was a U.S. backed thing. And sometimes in the present, it's hard to identify these patterns. And sometimes we can fall into certain habits of, there were a lot of, well-meaning people during the coup in Bolivia who said, oh, but, what's really happening here? I mean, it was a violent coup backed by the military. That's what it is. And so, yeah, and I just really love this book. It brought, personally, because it really brought me back into the, feeling confident in reading and studying. And I'm just going to read a line from Evo's intro because I think it's really powerful. We must work together towards a world in which greater respect for the people and for Mother Earth is possible. In order to do this, it is essential for states to intervene so that the needs of the masses and the oppressed are put first. We have the conviction that we are the masses and that the masses over time will win. Really beautiful words by Evo. I encourage everyone to get this book. If you haven't read it already, now I forget how many sections are, but it does give, very detailed kind of factual, historical manual, really, of how the U.S. carries forth these regime change operations, coups, what Washington bullets really means, what is the human toll of this. Really pick it up, and yeah, that's my book for today. And I know I'm putting you on the spot, Vijay, because it's written by you, but I had to.
Well, embarrassing, but good. Seriously, look at Zoe's setup today. She's at the People's Forum, which had a reading of the Communist Manifesto all day on Sunday in the lead up to Red Books Day today. I must say, nobody thus far, and this is a challenge for the rest of the world, nobody is going to be able to come close to what's happening in India, where hundreds of thousands of people are participating in Red Books Day. I'm putting out a public challenge to other parts of the world to come close to India. I know that later today, the landless workers movement in Brazil will be reading books in the various encampments and so on. Yes, I know that. Well, let's see. What did I say? 500,000 people in Kerala read EMS's work today. Also, people in India, in Delhi. I mean, one of them is the person who's the one of the main coordinators of Red Books Day, and that's Nitish Narayanan. Nitish, are you with us today? Have you arrived from your million activities that you've been on? I hope he can join us. He has been at many activities all day. And I must say, before Nitish joins fully, in Delhi, the Students' Federation of India went to protest the killing of a student in Bengal, Anis Khan, and they were detained by the police. Well, I got a message from Oishi Ghosh, one of the student organizers, and she had laid down a bunch of red books on the ground outside the police station. They had hoped to sit there and do their red books in front of the police station in the protest, but they were detained. So they had to leave the books sitting there. Very active, the Students' Federation of India. Nitish is also on the executive committee of the Students' Federation of India. Not sure if his camera will work in a little bit, but let's see. Prasanth, were you able to get out and about today in Delhi to have a look at some of these events?
Oh, no, sadly, I've been stuck in office all day, of course. But before Nitish joins us, I wanted to quickly put you on the spot again and ask you something about how basically Red Books Day was conceived, as in what really, how did this idea come about? This is the third year, I believe. So do give us a history lesson there.
Okay, very quickly. In 2018, 17, I can't even remember, our comrade and author Govind Pansare was shot to death at the age of 82 on the 16th of February. and he died on the 20th of February. It was a real shock for us. I mean, he was a veteran trade unionist, a communist, a lawyer, but apart from anything else, a popular educator who had written a terrific book called Who Was Shivaji? And Pansari was shot to death. We were quite surprised by this. In the leftward office, Sudhanva Deshpande, my close comrade and friend, and a few other colleagues at leftward, we had a conversation. We need to find a better way of talking about the attacks on left authors, left publishers, left bookshops, left magazines, and so on. And we raised this question with the other left Indian publishers, with Bharati Putakalam, with Chinta, with National Book Agency, with Kriya and others. And people got excited with the idea. We came out and said, let's go for a Red Books Day. This was in 2019, actually. The idea was floated. On February 21st, 2020, just before the pandemic hit us, we held the first Red Books Day, and it was beautiful. It started in a loft in Seoul, South Korea, and went all the way out to Cuba. In Tamil Nadu itself, 35,000 people in villages and towns read the Communist Manifesto. We've held it every year since then. Last year, in the middle of the pandemic, it was difficult. This year, I must say, it was a home run for Kerala. Kerala, by the way, is the home state of Prasanth, so that everybody's clear. And also Nitish. Nitish, what have you been reading?
What a coincidence.
Huh?
What a coincidence.
What a coincidence. Nitish, what are you reading for Red Books Day, given that you're one of the main organizers of Red Books Day?
Hi, Vijay and Zoe, Prasanth. I was holding this throughout the day. It's just means maybe I don't know whether you have a smallest version of this, but this is the smallest Communist Manifesto I have seen. I can keep it in my pocket. I was holding this to my heart throughout the day. Yeah, I could attend two gatherings today. One was with the leaders of All India Kisan Sabha and All India Agriculture Workers Union and Students Federation of India. In its national headquarters, All India headquarters, we held a meeting where the leader of the historic peasant movement, leaders of the historic peasant movement in India joined, and they were talking about how the books were inspiring them in shaping their political consciousness. Also, it was a meeting of both the senior activists, the leaders of class movement, and also the leaders of mass movement, student wing and all. Then we went to a place from where the very idea of celebrating Red Books Day emerged. That is the Leftward Books, made a bookstore, and there was a vibrant gathering at Leftward Studios of the today, joined by the cultural activists from Delhi University, a very vibrant, enthusiastic singing group from Jana Samskriti, another cultural active group, and there was a talk by Professor Surajit Majumdar on the relevance of Communist Manifesto. People were reading Communist Manifesto in multiple languages: Malayalam, Telugu, Bengali, Assamese, and all. And yeah, so it was really something which sponsor inspiration and enthusiasm for all of us. And yeah, this is my third gathering in a way today for Red Books Day. But today has been amazing. There were people without anybody's direction started organizing. This is where we saw Red Books Day maybe after 5 or 6 years. So there will be an organized effort in the initial years, but that will lead up to a moment where people without anybody's direction will come to the streets, will organize something. But on the third year itself, we have achieved that to an extent. There were people without any notification, without any circular, without any direction from the top. There were people who were organizing Red Books Day. there were youth activists, in some parts, youth activists, DYFA activists, who were donating red books to the local libraries. Means this is not going to end today. This is going to stay forever. The Red Books Day program started today. It's going to, in some place, it's going to. There were in areas like tribal areas and all, people have gathered and discussed on the Red Books Day. And as Vijay already mentioned, 500,000 people have read, or many of them are still reading. Now we are talking tens of thousands of people are still reading in small groups in every nook and corner of Kerala. I'm a member of Communist Party of India Marxist from Kerala. If I was there, I would have joined with my local comrades today to read Communist Manifesto. And also today, remember today morning, when everybody was getting ready to write on Red Books Day, celebrate Red Books Day, we lost a comrade in Kerala. One communist was hacked to death by the RSS. See, on the one side, we are doing the politics of book. On the other side, they are taking blood. It is book versus blood. Today is, we have seen, it's a book versus blood. The book of ideas, hope, inspiration, courage, unity, commitment, dreaming a better world is represented by lakhs of people across the world. On the other side, the right wing is strong. As long as you read, you move on with your red books, they are there with thirst, with a bloodthirsty mind setup. So that battle is on, but definitely in this battle, there is a lot to get confidence today. That streets and the social media platforms are proof for that. So I'm very much inspired and enthusiastic.
Right, Nitish, one quick question though. Could you since you mentioned the Communist Manifesto of you as your red book for the year, tell us about when you first read the manifesto itself and what kind of an impact did it have on you, if you can remember the first time.
I don't remember exactly at what age I read, but definitely it will be in the school time. I don't think it is that I read Communist Manifesto, but before that, Communist Manifesto has reached to me in the shape of some slogans, some songs which we sang in the Balasangam children's organization meetings, which we sang in the political rallies. So like the workers of the world unite, Sarvarajya Todilaligale Sangadikuvin. It's a famous song in Kerala. It's a popular song in Kerala. I'm sure Communist Manifesto reached to me with all these things. With all means some quotations, some slogans, some songs. Then we reached out to this beautiful text.
Thank you so much, Nitish. That's really amazing that you can share with us the incredible activities taking place across India. Of course, we join in rage and in mourning about the comrade that was, assassinated today. And it's so important on this day to remember all of the martyrs who have been killed because of their struggle for a better world, for a more just world, for their beliefs. And so we hold those close today as well as we continue, raising our red books and fighting for a better world. So thank you so much, Nitish. So glad to speak with you. And thanks for, coordinating and heading this great effort of Red Books Day.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. And next, we are going to be joined by a very great comrade, a very dear comrade, a close friend of mine, and she is Laura Capote. She is from the ALBA Secretariat. She's also part of the Colombian social movement Marcha Patriótica. Laura, thank you so much for joining us today, and tell us about your red book for the day.
Hi, comrades. First, thank you so much for inviting me. Second, all of you know that I don't speak very well English. So first, I say that That's going to be a very accidental English, but I'm going to try to do the best for you. So, oh my God, it's a very difficult question for a Latin American girl and militant, because we are all in our lives all the time. We read every time, read books, and we want always to learn about more read books, and this space is very hard to me to take one or choose one for say to you. So I'm going to talk about two read books. One that it's my favorite read book, and the two of one it's the book that I'm reading now. Okay, so the first about what is my favorite read book. I'm going to talk about the first read book that I read in my life that changed my life literally, and it's very important to me because when I was a child, I had 12 or 13 years, I went with my friends and my dad to the books feria in Bogota, Colombia. I'm from Colombia. And we walked among the stands, and in one of them, I saw a lot of book covers with a face that looks familiar to me. That's a person who looks familiar to me. And in that moment, I remember that in our house, there was a picture of that face, that exactly face. So I asked my dad who was that person, and he answered me that that person was the Che Guevara, and a very important man in the history of Latin America, and told me that if I want, I could choose any book of the stand and to read about him. So I saw a few books, and I chose a magazine from Ocean Sur called Contexto Latinoamericano. It's here. That this is my first read book that compiles some speeches and rights of the Che Guevara along his whole life, since the trips in Latin America, the Sierra Maestra, being leader of a Cuban revolution as a minister, and all the internationalist experiences around the world. And additional to that, the magazine closed with reflection of militants and intellectuals in Latin America about the Che Guevara example in today's context. To date, in that moment, I don't know, 12 years ago. So obviously my head in that moment exploded. And in the first pages, 2-3 pages, my head exploded. And because I can't believe that one person like that had existed. After that, obviously, and all the questions that I make to my dad, he showed me more of Che's books, talking about the Che and the Cuban Revolution, and next to that, he started to tell me about who was a man called Marx and another man called Lenin, and about October Revolution, and okay, everything that I'm doing in my life now. I think that start in that moment with that conversation and questions. And after read that book, like I said, my life has never been the same, because was the gateway. I think that the first moment to go to a world that guide all the decisions that I took in my adult life, and show me that the humanism is a moral guide. As a moral guide is the most important thing and the most important quality of a person, and especially of a revolutionary person. So I think that it's the most beautiful I have. It's my first gift of my dad, and was a read book. And the second, it's a book that I'm reading now. It's a very important book for me, that it's about Tiro Fijo, about Manuel Marulanda Vélez, that is an important leader of the guerrilla of FARC in Colombia, that organized thousands of farmers to take the guns to fight for a new Colombia. And for me, it's so important. It's a book about Arturo Alape and tell of the story of Manuel. So those are my favorite read books. And thank you so much. Thank you so much for inviting me here.
That's an amazing story, Laura, and it's great when we can reflect upon, how we entered the struggle. What was that moment? And I think there's so many moments for all of us when we realized nothing was going to be the same. Maybe it would be a little harder, but we would always be guided by humanism, as you say, by great leaders and martyrs like Che Guevara. people who continually guide us, every single day. So I think that's really a beautiful reflection, and definitely have to pick up the second book that you also mentioned. It sounds great, and thanks so much for sharing with us. And have a great rest of your Red Books Day.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you so much.
Bye, Laura. Prashanth, as a coming from Kerala, India, we know a little bit about the tradition. There seems to be a tendency of people from Kerala, maybe a little. Can you tell us a little bit about?
Again, like I said, what a coincidence.
What a coincidence. Maybe there's a pattern there. Tell us a little bit about your favorite Red book. Maybe a little bit about Kerala.
Oh man, that's a tough one. I'll go with the first question. That's easy. But of course, Kerala has a very long and glorious history of left organization, of course. And like I think both Vijay and Nitish hinted at both points of time, a left organizing which is like all good left organizing, very rooted in culture, very rooted in a diversity of social organizations. For instance, one of the most important movements of the left in Kerala was the public library movement. And even today, it's a very important, pillar of the left organization, so to speak, because leftist activists were very active across India and also especially in Kerala in literacy campaigns to start with, but also in establishing public libraries and maintaining public libraries in, left governments very strongly supported that. There is a very strong movement which has been dedicated to progressive culture. Again, a characteristic of the left across the country has very strong intervention in aspects of all kinds of culture. It's not just books, of course, but music, dance, poetry. So there's this very glorious tradition across the country of, if you look, for instance, and most people know of Bollywood, the Hindi movie industry, which today is like a multi-billion-dollar industry. But even up to a few decades ago, some of the greatest lyricists, for instance, or dialogue writers were all very powerfully influenced by leftist ideology, and many of the movies had it. So there is, of course, a very grand culture of intervention in the cultural sphere, which I think is very important for the left throughout the world as we keep continuing, and which is why Red Books Day is in some ways it's such a simple yet elegant and powerful concept. The idea that, on one day, the idea of a red book itself, which crystallizes so much of what we think and what Nitish and Laura and Francisca were talking about as well. My red book actually is something that I first read, let me see, that would be about 5 to 7 years ago, a bit late maybe, but 5 to 7 years ago. And I maintained a habit of reading it every year until very recently, where because of, like we just said, the responsibilities of work sometimes just overwhelm you. But it's basically 10 Days That Shook the World by John Reed. And this has been a book which from the first, I heard about it a lot much before I read it, but nothing really prepares you for reading that book, because it is, on the one hand, of course, a great work of history. It's a great work of political science, maybe. It's also a great work of journalism, because what you actually see is the nuts and bolts of a revolution, so to speak. Revolution as a movement, because you read about, say, Russian Revolution history, you read about Lenin and the Bolsheviks and all that in your history textbooks. But reading John Reed completely changes what you know and you think about the revolution, because it shows the massive participation of the people of Russia in this process, about how it was a bottoms-up process in its own way. The sheer number of people across the country, various interests, various thought processes, people, various levels of access to information, all coming together at some point in those fateful days of 1917 to create such a historic process, the impact of which continues to this day. And it's such a beautiful book because a lot of it is just straightforward reporting. And John Reed doesn't spend too much time theorizing or speculating. It's just him being at various places and writing what the people are saying. The fierce urgency that is there in those books, the tension, it's almost like a thriller, because there is so much tension in reading that book, because although you know what happened, But nonetheless, while reading that book, you feel the kind of tension that the people in Petrograd in 1917 experienced as they wondered, you know, what are, you're making history right now. How it's a difficult process. It's not an easy process. It's full of tension. You're racked by thoughts of what happens if you've moved one day too fast or one day too late. So all that suspense, all those passionate, declarations. And one of the most beautiful things again about that book is the fact that uh, it shows how I think there was this flowering of popular participation, an entire populace which had been suppressed by the Tsarist regime, and even later by the collaborators who assumed power after February 2017. This massive flowering of the people's will, so to speak, in the form of trade unions, in the form of popular newspapers, in the form of meetings. He talks again and again about how it was just people gathering everywhere again and again. And there's this brilliant line which I read a long time ago. It struck me, but nowadays, while we talk about protests taking place across the world, it just keeps coming back to me, which is that in the relations of a weak government and a rebellious people, there comes a time when every act of the authorities exasperates the masses, and every refusal to act excites their contempt. And this is exactly what you see, and the brilliant line by John Reed, exactly what you see in a place maybe like Sudan, in so many of the struggles in, for instance, Colombia, in Chile, where we saw, so many struggles in the farmers' movement in India. And this exactly is that sentiment that prevails. So John Reed had some amazingly, crisp lines also, which really conveyed the humanity of the revolution, the smallest details of it, as much as the larger process of it. And I think that's really something we've been talking about a lot, the importance of talking about those processes. So that is my Red Book of the day, or for the year.
That's amazing. And I would like to say that what you said about John Reed, so important. Leftward Books did an edition of 10 Days That Shook the World. And, we were debating inside the office, who should we ask to write the introductory, like the introduction. And everybody immediately agreed it has to be P. Sainath. We need a journalist to write the introduction to John Reed's book. I didn't want a long, involved thing about Soviet history and what happened to the Soviet Union and, blah, blah, blah. You know how those things can go. I wanted something where the energy of John Reed could be replicated. And wow, Sainath really delivered. Red Books Day 2022, a day of celebration, a day of hope. These are the key words for us. What are we celebrating? We're celebrating life. That's what we're celebrating. I mean, socialism is actually just a synonym for humanity. It's nothing other than that. We want to realize humanity in the world. We celebrate life. And what Nitish said earlier, so important, because today Comrade Punnul Haridas was killed in Kunnur by the fascistic forces in India. Punnul Haridas was a fisherman, a member of the Communist Party of India, Marxist, a person who also celebrated life. This is a celebration of that side of history. On the other side, it's also about hope, because it's not enough to just celebrate life. We have to hope for something. And I'd said that humanity and socialism, these are synonyms, but we have to get there. They don't just come from the sky. We have to get there. Every Red Books, I think of how lucky I was as a young boy in West Bengal to have had access to used books on the footpaths of my city, where footpath sellers would sell us all kinds of stuff. And I must say, I read some real garbage. But I was also really, really grateful to the Soviet Union, because without the Soviet Union, I would have not, I was a terrible student in school, but I would not have read anything. And I mean, to close out our show, I just want to reach behind me, if that's okay, guys, because I want to bring this book, which I bought for, I don't know, must have been about 2 rupees. This is Marx's Capital. I bought this book on the 14th of March 1981. I must say, I was only about 14 years old. And I don't know if I even knew, I don't think I read this book for years after that. But I bought this book because I went with my radical friends and they were like, oh, you should buy these. And I bought Tolstoy, which I love Tolstoy, and I bought these 3 volumes. Um, thank God for the Soviet Union, because the Soviets produced these books. This is from Progress Publishers, at prices that we could afford, and we children in places like Calcutta, India, in West Bengal, we got access to books that we would never have seen. And every Red Books Day, I want to tip my cap to the Soviet people for allowing some of their precious social wealth to go towards subsidizing book publishing, to let illiterate children like myself, confront these great books and become part of this great journey of bringing humanity onto the planet. um, are we going to be back on Friday?
Of course.
Yes, we'll be back on Friday. This show is called Give the People What They Want. Today was a really special edition. I think, I'm not sure whether this was Prashant's idea or Zoe's idea. I think it might have been Prashant's idea, just
It was
casually
Prashant.
at the end of our show on Friday said, should we do a special on Monday for Red Books Day? Thanks a lot, Prashant, for that.
It was fun.
I think we should do some more of these specials every once in a while, but this is not what we really do. We'll be back with you on Friday at the exact correct time, which because you're there. And I must say, Prashant, Zoe, I'm disappointed. The selfie game has really dropped off. I'm looking forward to some selfies, perhaps selfies of this show, you watching this show. It
With your
brings
Red
us
Book.
a lot of joy.
Your Red Book. It's a triple selfie.
Do a selfie watching this show holding your favorite Red Book. Yeah, that's what we're asking
Small price
those
to
of you who are here to do.
All right.
Okay,
See you on Friday.
Thanks, everyone.
sayonara.